story.
Hello, welcome to Story Time with Mrs. Cruz. This week's story was given to us by Mrs. Foley's third grade class. It is The Pudding Like a Night in the Sea. And this is a group of stories by Anne Cameron. And these are short stories, the stories that Julian tells. So we have some very special guests with us. We have Pinky and Stinky, and if you notice, we are filming in a different place. We are in the staff lounge in school. We also have some guest stars this week in our video. One of them, and I will introduce them by characters, is Marcus from 5th grade. Marcus will be playing our father, and on his hand is a puppet. That will be his wife. Then we have the two boys that are in the story. We have Miss Mary and Miss Anita, and they will be playing the boys in this story. So we're doing just a little different take, and so let's begin. Oh, I don't really need to move because you're going to focus on him. Okay. The Pudding Like a Night on the Sea. Face the camera. I'm going to make something special for your mother, my father said. Mother was shopping. My father was in the kitchen looking at pots and pans and the jars of this and that, looking at pots and pans. Just pick them up. Lisa, you may want to sit here. Don't fret. Looking at pots and pans. What are you going to make? Father said, I will be making a pudding. My father was a big man with wild black hair. When he laughs, the sun laughs in the window panes. He has a great smile. You can make any noise you want. When he thinks, you can almost see his thoughts on the tables and chairs. When he is angry at me and my brother, Huey, we shiver to the bottom of our shoes. What kind of pudding will you make? Huey said. Dad said, I am going to make a wonderful pudding. Can you do that? Okay, we're going to go back. What I say, ready?
Wonderful pudding.
Dad said, I am going to make, you do that, I am going to make a beautiful pudding. It will taste like a raft of lemons. It will taste like a night on the sea. Then Father took a knife and sliced 5 lemons in half. He squeezed the first lemon. Juice squirted in his eye. Stand back, Father said. And he squeezed the lemon again. The seeds flew out on the floor. Pick up those seeds, Huey. Pick up those seeds, Huey. Huey took the broom and swept them up. Then my father cracked some eggs, and he put those yolks in the pan. Then Father said to Julian, Julian, bring me some sugar. He rolled up his sleeves, pushed back his hair, and then poured the sugar in and continued to beat those yolks. He went on beating. Then he put the lemon juice and cream in the pan and set it on the stove. The pudding bubbled as he stirred really fast. Then Father said, "Huey, wipe that up, Huey," he said. And Huey did. It was hot by the stove. Father loosened his collar and pushed his sleeves up. Oh, he took his jacket off. The stuff in the pan was getting thicker and thicker, and he held the beater high in the air, and said, "This pudding is just right." And he sniffed the pudding. He whipped the egg whites and mixed them into the pudding. And then he looked at the pudding really, really close and said, "This pudding looked softer and lighter than air." And then Father said, "Done!" And he washed all the pots and pans. He gathered up his materials, went over to the sink, and washed the pots and pans. And so as he was washing the pots and pans, water was splashing all over the floor. Splash water a lot. Water was splashing all over the floor. And he wiped the counters so fast. He was wiping the counters so fast that his hair made circles around his head. He was shaking his head while he was, yes. And then Father said, "Perfect. Now I'm going to take a nap. Oh, because I'm so tired, I'm going to take a nap." And then he said to Huey and Julian, "If something important happens, bother me. But if nothing important happens, then don't bother me. And the pudding is for your mother." He went into the living room. Sat on a comfy chair. He put his feet up. He stretched his arms and took a long nap. He was sitting up straight in his chair. Huey and I guarded the pudding. But Huey said, "Oh, what a wonderful pudding, with waves on top like the ocean. I wonder how it tastes." Julian said, "Leave the pudding alone." But Huey said, "If I just put my finger in there, I'll know how it tastes." And he did. Julian said, "You did it! How does it taste?" Huey said, "It tastes like a whole raft of lemons, and it tastes like a night on the sea." Julian said, "You've made a hole in the pudding, but since you did it, I'll have to taste it too." And so Julian began to taste his pudding and said it tasted like floating at sea. Huey said, "It's such a big pudding. It can't hurt if I have a little more." "Well, since you took more," Julian said, "I'll have some more too." And they began to eat all that pudding as fast as they could. They were licking and licking and licking. And Huey said, "I want more. I want more." Julian said, "I want some more too." And then they looked upon on the stove, and then there was more pudding. So they opened up more pudding on the stove, on the back of the stove. There's more pudding on the back of the stove. And they opened up those two containers, and they started to eat and eat and eat and eat all the pudding. And then one of them said, "Whoops, you put your whole hand in the pudding." And the pudding spilled on the floor. And then one of them said, Julian said, "I have to clean that up." And took the rag from the sink and started scrubbing around and cleaning up that pudding. The pudding had spilled that it looked like craters on the moon. And they said, "Oh, we may have to smooth this pudding over." So they began to eat more because they didn't know what to do. So they just began to eat and eat and eat so it looks like it did before. And then Huey said, "Uh-oh, there isn't much left." "We were supposed to leave the pudding alone," Huey said. Huey said, "Mom is going to not be surprised because there is nothing left for her." Huey and Julian, they ran into their bedroom and crawled under the bed. And they called in there, and they crawled under their bed because they had to hide. They knew that Father would be getting up soon. And so Father opened his eyes and thought that he would go look at his pudding. And he came into the kitchen and said, "Huey and Julian? Huey and Julian!" And he looked at the stove. And he looked at the pudding. And he was so angry. He was angry. He was shaking his hands in the air. He was shaking his hands in the air. He was so upset. And he said really loud, "Where are you boys?" And then he went into the bedroom and started to look for the kids. His voice went through every crack in the corner of the house. And he said really loud again, "Where are you boys?" And Huey whispered, "I'm scared." We heard my father walking slowly through the rooms. "Huey!" he called. "Julian!" he called. We could see his feet. He was coming into our room. He looked under the bed. There was his face, his eyes like black lightning. He grabbed us by our legs and pulled us out and said, "Stand up!" And Huey and Julian, they stood up. And Father said to them, with his finger pointing at them, "Do you have something to tell me?" And Huey said, "We went outside. And when we came back, the pudding was gone." And then Father said to them, with his finger pointing at them, "Why were you hiding under the bed?" Julian and Huey, they looked down. They looked at the floor. And then Huey said, "I can tell you one thing." Oh, no, sorry. Huey didn't say that. Then Father, with his finger still pointed at them, said, I'm going to tell you one thing. There is going to be a beating here now. And there is going to be some whipping. The curtains at the window were shaking. And then Father said, go into the kitchen. And Huey and Julian got up right away, and they went into the kitchen. Huey walked toward the kitchen with his hands behind his back. Father said, see those eggs? Crack them and put the yolks in the pan. And set the pan on the counter. Oh. Huey, crack those eggs. Put them in the pan. And now it's time for your beating. So you need to beat those eggs. And Huey started to cry. And he was beating the eggs. His tears fell on the egg yolks. Take this, my father said, when he handed me the egg beater. I want this to be a good beating, so you keep beating those eggs. Oh, Huey said. He stopped crying and he beat the yolks. Now you, Julian, Father said to Julian. Come here. Father said to Julian, I hope you're ready for your whipping. Julian didn't answer. He was so afraid to say yes or no. Here, said Father. And he set the egg whites in front of Julian. I want these whipped as well. You just keep whipping these eggs. It's time for your whipping. Just whip these eggs. And Julian said, yes, sir, and started whipping. My father watched us. My mother came into the kitchen and watched us too. After a while, Huey said, this is hard work. And Father said, that is too bad. Your beating is not done. And so then Father added the sugar to the pan. Father added sugar to the pan, and Huey then took a turn beating. Julian said, my arm hurts from whipping. And Father said, that is too bad. We have to continue to whip. So they whipped, and Huey and Julian beat and whipped those eggs to make a beautiful pudding for their mother. And so Huey held the pudding in the air, and Father said, see, a good pudding takes a beating. It's thick now. Your beating is done. And then he turned and said to Julian, see, Julian, a good whipping makes pudding fluffy and puffy. Congratulations, your whipping is done. Then he passed the pudding to the mother. And Mother said, what a wonderful pudding. Would you like some, boys? No, thank you, we said. She picked up a spoon and ate the pudding and said, this tastes like a whole raft of lemons, and it tastes like a night on the sea. And then the whole family turned together to face the camera, holding their pudding. And everyone received a proper whipping and beating to give a happy ending to this story. Thank you. Join us for next week when we have another story. We haven't picked that class yet, but it could be you. Thank you for listening.